Hello, my name is Guy Barefoot. I'm an Associate Professor in Film Studies here at the University of Leicester, and I'm here to give a short talk taken from one of our first year modules, Reading Film. It's a module designed to develop your understanding of film form and style and your skills in film analysis. It's an introductory module focused on films, but I'm also going to use this to touch on approaches to film and indeed on the emergence of film studies around 50 years ago. I'm going to concentrate on one aspect of film style, mise en scène. I will therefore start with definitions, with the question of what mise en scène is, but also what is its place within film style as a whole. And my aim is to provide clear answers, but also to indicate differences of approach. Definitions are not always singular. There are differences and debates, and in line with that, I will set out some of the different ways in which this term, mise en scène, has been understood. And in the first part, I'm going to be using as illustrations images from the 2014 Wes Anderson film, The Grand Budapest Hotel, seen on the left. And I'm going to set out different components of mise en scène and say a little bit more about one of those components, lighting. And finally, I will point out the ways in which the notion of mise en scène has been important within film criticism and the emergence of film studies. What then is mise en scène? One definition, found in what is probably the most widely read introductory book on film studies, Film Art, is that it is the director's control over what appears in the film frame. Note here the slightly different spelling of the name. Mise en scène can be spelled with or without an accent. In film art, it is also broken up into 4 components. 1, setting, 2, lighting, 3, costume and makeup, and 4, staging or movement and performance. So in the image here from the Wes Anderson film, we can think about how those elements have been organized, from the bright red of the wall of the lift to the purple uniforms of the hotel staff and the contrasting heights of the actors crammed into space. Mise en scène thus forms one element of film style. It is closely related to cinematography, but while in discussing cinematography we are discussing the properties of the camera, in discussing mise en scène we are discussing what is in front of the camera. A similar but slightly different definition can be found in another introduction to film analysis, the book Looking at Movies. Here, mise en scène is discussed in terms of design and composition. How the look of the settings, props, lightings, and the actors is determined, and the organization, distribution, balance, and general relationship of these elements within the space of each shot. In terms of creative personnel, this is to emphasize the contribution of the set designer as well as that of the film director emphasized in film art. And then to take a third definition, John Gibbs provides a definition in his short book on mise en scène, where he notes its origins in the theatre and where he suggests that for the film student, the most useful definition is the contents of the frame and how they are organized. The words he highlights then are contents and organize, but we can also pick up on the word frame. And you'll notice in looking at this image that the frame, the overall shape of the image, is different from that of the earlier images from the same film. So in picking up on this point on content and organization, both the Grand Budapest Hotel, seen on the right there, and the earlier Hollywood film Grand Hotel, seen on the left, use a hotel setting, and we have scenes here from similar parts of the hotel. So they're similar if slightly different in terms of content. For a start, the 2 isolated figures in the Wes Anderson film contrasts with the crowded scene in the 1932 film. But there are differences also in how that content is organized and filmed. The widescreen of the Anderson film accentuates the isolation of the two figures at the table, while the narrow aspect ratio, the shape of the screen image, is there to make the scene all the more crowded. In some accounts, this moves into questions of cinematography. In film art, the authors refer to mise en scène as a way of controlling the event to be filmed, distinct from how that event is captured on film or its digital format. However, film is not the same as theatre, and it's not easy to separate the content of the shot from how it is shot. In some accounts, that distinction between event and how it is captured is abandoned. Gibbs, for instance, writes that, as on the right here, the organization of the contents of the frame encompasses the relationship of the actors to one another and to the decor, but also their relationship to the camera and thus the audience's view. So in talking about mise en scène, one is also talking about framing, camera movement, the particular lens employed, and other photographic decisions. So we can distinguish between mise en scène and cinematography, between staging and the process of filming, but we can also look at the relationship between the two. And the importance of that relationship is particularly evident in the case of lighting. What we see is created and affected by how the film set or location is lit, whether by available light or the introduction of additional lighting. But in actual production, note Barsom and Monaghan in looking at movies, the cinematographer, they say, determines the lighting once the camera setups are chosen. Lighting will vary in different ways in terms of quality, which is not to say it can be good or bad, but points to the difference between the clear shadows, textures and edges created by hard lighting and the more diffuse effects of soft lighting. It can come from different directions, from the front or the back, below or above, or more often from a combination of these, all of which affects the audience's perception of the individual or object being lit. It can, but need not have, an identifiable source within the frame. It will vary not just between monochrome, black and white, and a wide palette of colours, but also in tonal range and intensity. And what this means in practice can be seen in looking at different moments in film history. In the early years of cinema, filmmakers often relied on available light, whether shooting outdoors, as in the image on the top left there, from the Lumiere brothers film from 1895, or in, for instance, Thomas Edison's Black Maria studio, which were indoor studios that had a roof that could be open to let light in or closed to contribute to the blackout. Combined with the fact that actors tended to be filmed from a distance, this in those early years meant that audiences were less able to see facial expression in any detail. Effects lighting, the use of lighting to create a distinctive look or to highlight moments in the drama, began to be introduced in the US around the second decade of the 20th century. For instance, in the films of Cecil B. DeMille, films such as The Cheat, seen on the bottom left there, which were promoted for their artistic lighting effects, appealing to an image of lighting from earlier forms of painting. In the classical Hollywood style that emerged later on in the 20th century and remained dominant afterwards, the three-point lighting style was dominant. Or at least one should say, as Baldwin, Thompson and Smith do, classical Hollywood filmmaking developed the custom of using at least 3 light sources per shot. The backlight helps distinguish the body of the actor, and we see there in the picture of Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca from the early 1940s. The backlighting helps distinguish the actor's body from what is behind him or her. The brighter key light helps direct our attention, and the fill light softens the shadows so that the key light has created. The lighting system, this particular lighting system, was used for clarity and also glamour, allowing us to see characters and objects within the frame clearly, and also to see characters in a sympathetic light. Unbalance that, or take one of those lights away and emphasize a bright light on-screen source, you can get an image like this one from the 1947 film T-Men, photographed by John Alton, an innovative camera cinematographer who, as well as filming a number of films, wrote the book Painting with Light about cinematographic techniques. Here, the emphasis on backlighting produces a harsh light in which facial expression again is lost, and the emphasis is on figures in profile. So lighting depends in part on technological advances, and technological advances also led to the gradual replacement of black and white photography by colour, but also could allow for a return to the use of available light. And the image here on the right is from Barry Lyndon, a film made in the 1970s and set in the 18th century. And director Stanley Kubrick and the cinematographer, in this instance John Alcott, were able to use candlelight to shoot nighttime scenes in the film in a way that wasn't possible before, and use that to evoke the period in which the film was set and also how that period has been represented in other movies. And returning to the Grand Budapest Hotel, we can see how contemporary films combine these different elements. In this image, the supposedly natural life of the source is placed at the centre of the frame, if also in the background. Here the human figure is singled out only to a degree. We are not seen a star, but an unnamed character who is essentially part of the mise en scène. The artistic effect is accentuated through the content and through how the scene is lit, and this is conveyed through the colour palette. And the films of director Wes Anderson, this particular film no less than others, are known for their distinctive colour palette. So lighting belongs to mise en scène and cinematography, but I also want to say something about the importance of mise en scène in the emergence of film studies in the essentially the late 1950s or the 1950s and the 1960s in both Britain and in France. And I'm going to do that with reference to 3 examples. My first example was originally published in the influential French journal Cahiers de Cinéma, though it is quoted in John Gibbs's book on mise en scène. Party Girl, the film referred to here, is a gangster film featuring Sid Charisse, who you see in both images. Directed by Nicholas Ray. Ray was one of the Hollywood directors championed in Cahiers de Cinéma as an auteur, as the author of the films that he directed. The case here was not that Ray was rising above Hollywood commercialisms by working with serious material. It is not even that he was a director who had overall control over each element of the production, but according to this commentary, if Party Girl had an idiotic story, that did not have to be a concern for those who championed Ray for his visual style. Ray himself is known to have said, if it was all in the script, why make the film? He was celebrated for how he treated the material he was given for the mise en scène. Thus, the stress on mise en scène emerged as a way of valuing directors working within the Hollywood studio system. Mise en scène is here understood as not just setting, lighting, costume and makeup and performance, but as giving expression to everything on the screen. This emphasis on the director and on mise-en-scène could also be found in Britain around the same time. Thus, Robin Wood, a key British critic of the 1960s and afterwards, in part through his influential book on films of Alfred Hitchcock, also emphasized mise-en-scène, which he seems in effect to use to refer to directing. So Wood talks about what the director does. He focuses very much on male directors, as was common at the time. What he does is mise-en-scène, and it is precisely here that the artistic significance of the film, if any, lies. Wood went on, the movement of the film from shot to shot, the relationship of one shot to all the shots already taken or not, which will make up the finished film, cutting, montage, all this is mise-en-scène, and still more, for mise-en-scène is not all of these things considered as separate and detachable items. It is also what fuses all these into one organic unity, and consequently more, much more, than the sum of its parts. The tone and atmosphere of the film, the visual metaphor, the establishment of the relationship between characters, the relationship of all parts of the whole, all this is mise-en-scène. So what we have there is both a different understanding of mise-en-scène, but also a particular view of film which values the director in particular and emphasizes the idea of the director as author, and also values organic unity, the close relationship between style and content. And my final example is along the same lines. It comes from Victor Perkins, another British critic who, like Wood, wrote for the British journal Movie, a publication that started in the early 1960s and was known for its emphasis on film analysis, film style. And in 1972, Perkins goes on to publish Film as Film, the subtitle which is Understanding and Judging Movies, in which he set out his own approach to studying film. And I'm quoting here from that book and from another discussion within that book of a different Nicholas Ray film, in this instance, Johnny Guitar. And Perkins describes a scene in the film in which, as he puts it, a funeral becomes a lynch mob, joined by the sister of the man being buried. And he goes on, as she forces up the speed of the pursuit, the wind carries away her black veiled hat to be trampled in the dust beneath galloping hooves. The action of the hat amplifies our view of the character. Grief for the loss of her brother is not the motive guiding Emma's actions, and her sorrow has been forgotten in the exhilaration of the chase. He goes on, a single image is made to act both as a recording to show what happened and as an expressive device to heighten the effect and significance of what we see. So again, a point is being made about the expressive power of mise-en-scène. But while Perkins is making a case for the style of Nicholas Ray's film, he is also arguing that this is not style for its own sake, but style linked to narrative function and the amplification of our view of the character. In summary, we can think of mise-en-scène as the different elements placed in front of the camera, breaking this down again into setting and props, lighting, costume and makeup, performance and figure behavior, and we can in turn break down those individual elements as we've done with lighting. We can also think of it in broader terms, in terms of design, organization, composition, direction. But identifying the different elements of mise-en-scène is only one stage. We also need to think about how it is used and to what effect. It can be seen as that which gives meaning to what appears on the screen, or as an expressive device, heightening the effect and significance of what we see. And when we study a film, we can identify and break down the different elements, but we also need to think about how they combine and the power and effect that they have. And beyond that, we can think about the different approaches we adopt, whether, like Wood and Perkins, we emphasise the individual director organic unity, or whether we adopt a different approach. Thank you.